My parents included my adopted brother in the Christmas family postcard photo but left me out. I, a 17-year-old female, have a younger brother named Nathan, who is 15. I have always had this feeling that my parents preferred him over me. Nathan is adopted. My parents adopted him around 9 years ago. He fits right in with our family. In fact, I would even say that he looks more like a part of my family and like the kind of child my parents should have had than I do. I'm not saying this because I want to, but because my parents have joked about this several times. I feel like they really don't mean it as a joke. My family is really conventionally attractive, and I'm not even kidding, they could be on the cover of some family magazine. I unfortunately don't really fit in. I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes as a kid, which made it very difficult for me to lose weight. My parents tried to control my portions, and whatever I consumed was strictly monitored by them, but that's no way to live. I used to have to eat in secret because it genuinely felt like they were starving me. It was already very difficult for me to maintain a healthy weight, and because of my eating habits, it became impossible for me to lose weight. I'm going to be honest, I'm quite overweight now. Then, around 6 months ago, I was unfortunately diagnosed with fibromyalgia. For the past 3 months, I have been forced to intermittently use a wheelchair because the symptoms are so severe, and I have flare-ups quite frequently, but I don't really know the reason for that yet, so I can't even prevent it from happening. Life had already been pretty difficult for me earlier since I had been an introverted kid, and even at home, the way I was treated was not exactly ideal. But now, after my diagnosis, things have taken a turn for the worse. Earlier, I was just overweight, but now I am that fat kid in a wheelchair. I was struggling mentally, and my parents did nothing to help me improve my situation. Instead, they started making it even worse for me because their behavior made it pretty apparent that they considered me a burden on their family. So, I started restricting myself to my room as much as I could because I really did not want to bother them, and it is incredibly lonely. I can't help it, I really don't want to feel like I'm constantly disappointing everyone around me. I always kept feeling like they didn't really want me as part of their family, but I dealt with it by shaking these thoughts off. However, after the incident that took place a couple of weeks ago, it became much more difficult to do that. Almost 3 weeks ago, my parents were discussing the Christmas postcard that we send out every year to the rest of the family. The next day, like every year, I got dressed in the red outfit and went to the living room so I could be a part of the family photograph. It's been a ritual for years, and I thought that even though everything had changed, at least this would remain constant and I would still continue to feel like part of my own family. But they took that away from me as well. As soon as they saw me, they got really awkward and said that they had thought maybe this time it would only be the 3 of them because I was in a wheelchair that day, and they didn't want to spoil their photograph. I was shocked that they would even say something like that, but I tried to bargain with them. I said that I would try to stand for a couple of pictures, and it really wouldn't be that bad for me, but they insisted that I should stay in the wheelchair and just let them take the photos. That made it very obvious to me that they did not want me in the picture anyway, in the most literal sense of the phrase. So, I went back to my room and cried myself to sleep. The worst part was that nobody even came by to check on me. It was a horrible day towards the end of a horrible year, and I just couldn't bear it. So that day, I finally called my grandmother and told her everything that was going on. My grandma is my dad's mother, and she's a wonderful person. My grandpa passed away when my dad was just 10 years old, and since then, she has built a life for herself from scratch. She's really strong and inspirational, and she loves me more than anyone else. I would have gone to live with her, but I was really holding out on the fact that at some point my parents would probably change and treat me better. But that day, I realized that it was never going to happen. My grandmother knew that my parents didn't exactly treat me well, and several times she had asked me to move in with her if I wanted to. That day, I told her that I really wanted to go away. I wanted to leave this house and live with her because clearly, I was not wanted here. I had known that for a really long time, but I had still been fighting with myself, trying not to believe it because, at the end of the day, they were still my parents and this was my family. But if this was my family, I was probably better off without one. She was the one who was there for me that day. She calmed me down and comforted me on the phone while I continued to sob. She also told me that she would be there in a couple of days as soon as she was back from her cruise with her friends, and then she would take me away with her. Yeah, my grandma has a pretty cool lifestyle. Anyway, I made her promise that she would take me away, and after that, I did not say anything to my parents because I had realized that it was not worth it. They did not even bother to apologize to me after that particular incident for excluding me from the photograph. They pretended like everything was normal, and so did I, because I knew that I was going to be rescued from this place soon enough. My grandmother, true to her word, showed up at our place last week. For 7 entire days, I had barely spoken to my parents or Nathan. All I did was go to school, come back home, and then stay in my room for the rest of the day. But on the day that my grandmother visited, I was the one to open the door for her and invite her in. My parents did not have a clue about what was going to happen, so they seemed pretty relaxed to have her around and were acting as if everything was normal. But my grandmother was having none of it. She asked them why exactly I had not been included in the Christmas postcard. As soon as she was seated, the postcards hadn't even been sent out yet, so my parents were really confused as to how she found out. But then they figured out that I must have told her about that incident, and instead of acting apologetic for it, they turned to me and rolled their eyes, saying that I had no reason to make a big deal out of it and complained to my grandmother about that. They offered the same explanation once again. They did not want to bother me by having me stand up for the picture, and if I had my wheelchair in the photo, it would spoil the photograph. So far, I hadn't said anything, but then I took the opportunity to point out that I had told them that I was fine with standing up for a couple of minutes, but they were the ones who had refused, and that obviously meant that they really did not want me in the picture. I pointed out that they had always treated me like an outsider in my family because I did not fit in with them, even though that was not my fault. I told them that it was ironic that even though Nathan was adopted, they treated him more like somebody who was actually their flesh and blood, as opposed to me. They only considered me a burden, even though Nathan and I used to be close when we were children, and he had observed the way our parents treated me and had chosen to distance himself from me as well. So, in the end, I was left with absolutely no one in this household. At least then, Nathan had the good sense to look away because he knew whatever I was saying was true. My parents got mad at me instantly for saying that Nathan was adopted, as if he didn't know. Obviously, he was aware of it because he was 6 years old when he came into our family, and I had never thought of him as less of a brother just because he was not biologically related to me. But my point was still true, that he always received the treatment that I didn't, not because he looked more like my parents' kid and I did not. Maybe I had kind of started resenting all of them a little bit because of how I was being treated. Even then, my parents did not take the opportunity to apologize or even act like they were sorry. They just said that I was acting spoiled and being nasty by bringing up the fact that Nathan was adopted just to justify my behavior. They even went on to say that they expected an apology from me now. I was about to argue even more, but I guess my grandma had had enough by that point. She intervened and said that there was no need for that. She was here to prevent exactly this kind of mistreatment from taking place anymore. My parents looked confused, so she told them that she was taking me off their hands since they had never bothered to hide the fact that they considered me a burden on the family. I was turning 18 in a couple of months, so there was no real need to bother with custody and whatever. I could just go live with her, and it would be completely fine. My parents seemed shocked for a couple of minutes. Nobody said anything, but then they said that if my grandmother really wanted to take me with her, they wouldn't stop her, and they would only be happy if I went with her. They even said that they had planned to talk to me about this soon because they wanted me to be happy, and if my grandmother was offering me that opportunity, then they were going to support my decision. They even said that it was the least they could do after everything that had happened. This took me by surprise because they had never spoken to me about anything like this before. I didn't understand what was happening at all. They even offered to let me pack up and go with her immediately if that was what I wanted, so I did exactly that. I packed a few essentials and left with my grandma. The very next day, my parents called me and told me that they were sorry for everything and that they did not want to lose me. They said that it was really painful for them to think of me leaving the house, and they would have to go through therapy to figure out why they had behaved like that. They said that if I wanted to come back home, they would love to have me back, but only if I was sure that I wanted to be with them again. They said that they did not want me to be a burden and that they had always considered me their child. They said that even though they did not handle my health well earlier, they wanted to support me and make things better. They even admitted that they had always preferred Nathan over me and were sorry for how they treated me. However, they also asked me if I could give them some time to work on improving themselves and their relationship with me. They were not trying to make excuses for their behavior, they just wanted to work on it so they could get better. They really did sound like they were genuinely sorry. But I don't really know what to do now. It feels like they are being honest and regretful for their past actions, but it's so hard to trust them after everything. I want to believe that they genuinely want to change, but it's so difficult to forget how they treated me. I'm happy living with my grandmother, but I'm also conflicted because my parents' offer is making me question whether or not I should give them another chance.